Well, Lindner Lesser, the host of Introspection. And today, my guest is Kristen Toscano, who is a quantum human design specialist and alignment coach. She helps people get unstuck from the shoulds and have more fun and energy, stop taking garbage from everyone else, and to become their own authority so they can create the life and work of their dreams without burning out in the process. Welcome to Introspection, the podcast about moving from grief to growth. I'm Amy Lindner Lesser, your host. Introspection started out as a podcast about hospitality, innkeeping, and innkeepers. After about a year, I realized that my life and interests have morphed from hospitality to helping others navigate from grief and loss to growth and living. In this new version of Introspection, I will be talking about my personal experiences with loss, and there are quite a few, what I've learned along the way through my professional training, as well as from my coaching experiences. I'll also be bringing in guests to share interesting ideas. So grab a beverage, find a comfy place, take a deep breath, and listen in. So it's interesting because I think many of us have heard about about astrology and what is that? Quantum human design is completely different and yet not different. So Kristen, welcome. And I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say about human design first, and then quantum human design, and to help us see how we can maybe apply quantum human design to our lives with loss and how it can help us move forward.
Yes, thank you, Amy. I'm so happy to be here.
So tell us first, what is human design?
Yeah, so human design synthesizes astrology. As you mentioned, it's similar because it draws from that ancient wisdom, but it ties it in with the I Ching, the chakra system, the Judaic Kabbalah, and then you throw quantum mechanics and how energy flows in the mix. And what I love about it is that it gives us a really practical tool that we can leverage not only for our own self-acceptance, but then we can leverage it in how we create in the world.
That sounds fabulous. So tell me, you need basic information like astrology. So where I was born, when I was born, and everybody else here. And then what happens? Do you do a chart similar to astrology or?
Yeah, so you do your birth date, time, and location, and you get a chart, what's called the body graph, and you'll see influences of those different systems within the body graph, but it doesn't look like the circle of the astrology chart. You have numbers and planetary symbols on each side. The black side of your design is based on when you were born, and that carries your soul curriculum. And then you have the red side of your design, which is based on the planetary placements about 3 months before you were born. And this carries more of your life story.
So is it, okay, 3 months before I was born or somebody else. So is it saying that our personality and our life design happens 3 months before birth, like nothing before or after the 3 months, or the last 3 months of gestation we're sort of quiet?
No, that's when the design crystal gets picked up, and this carries more of your life story, more of your genetics, more of the human part of your journey. And so what we see in the chart is kind of this push-pull with some core themes and lessons that you're here to explore throughout your life in this dance between what your soul came here to do and learn and the story of your life.
So what my soul came is more the astrology part, that it's sort of based on, or no, I shouldn't say that. when I read astrology reports, basically it's everybody who's born within those 4 weeks has the same thing. And it's like, that's impossible. I'm completely different from the person standing next to me who may have been born on the same day, even the same year. I've never met anybody at the same time, though. I'm sure that that's possible, probable. So the commonalities then would be divergent because of the human design part and what happened in the 3 months. Like, how do we stay separate and different identities?
So not exactly. It's because with the human design and astrology and a lot of these different systems, we're talking about archetypes. So archetypes run on a spectrum, but there are common patterns that we may see. And so even though you may have similarities in your chart, you're going to express them differently based on your life experience or your interactions with the world around you. And so even though we may have similar themes to explore in our charts, we're going to express them out in the world in a different way. And so even like twins who are born relatively close together and on paper, their charts may look the same, they're going to show up in the world as unique individuals.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, in astrology, we have 12 signs. What are we looking at with human design?
So in human design, we look at the 64 gates, which correlate to the Chinese I Ching. And so there is that astrology piece to it. Like when we look at the mandala, there is the 12 astrological signs, but each of those are divided up into gates of the I Ching hexagrams.
Okay. And then like what can you tell from the chart?
Mm-hmm. So based on where those planets were, certain things will get colored in, or what we call defined in the chart. And the themes that are defined are things that you're here to explore internally about yourself over the course of your lifetime. The other things in the chart that are white are what we call open or undefined. And those are energetic themes that you're going to explore through your relationships because you take in the energy of others in those different areas and you experience them in an amplified way, but they're not yours sustainably. Like you pick up this theme through this person, and then it's a little bit different through someone else. And so you experience these themes with a lot of variability depending on what relationships you're engaged in.
As if they're not yours to take on and take with you for the rest of your life.
Exactly.
Like a suitcase that you may take from New York to Paris and leave it in Paris and then take something else.
Yes, exactly. For example, if someone has an undefined, what's known as the identity center, which is the diamond in the middle, this is the center for love and direction. And so if someone has that center defined, like I do, I have a pretty good idea of the direction that I'm headed. I may not know exactly how I'm going to get there, but I have a pretty strong sense of who I am and where I'm going. I still have choice within that, but I'm picking from, say, a menu. If someone has an open or undefined identity center, they can feel the identity, the heart of the people that they're around. So they can walk into a room and feel that identity. They can borrow it. They can put it on, try it on, and see whether or not they like it. And it allows them to become really wise about identity because they get to experience themselves through the identity of all the different groups that they interact with. And they get choice on how they choose to express. But they may feel that their direction's not so set, and they may struggle with, well, I tried this for a while, and then I tried that for a while, and then I went over here. But there's a lot more variability in that experience.
How does that differ from an empath who picks up energies from other people in the room?
Yeah. So when we look at the human design body graph, I almost look at empaths as there are several different types of empaths. Someone with an undefined identity center that we were just talking about, they're empathic in that they can feel the identity of others. They can feel their heart. Someone who has an undefined emotional solar plexus center, which is the triangle on the right side of the chart, that's the archetype of the emotional empath, which I think is what most of us think about when we talk about empaths, because they're taking in the emotional energy of others and experiencing it in an amplified way. Then on the left side of the chart, there's another triangle called the spleen center. And this is the archetype of the medical empath. So these people feel what's going on with others in their bodies. It's also the center where fears live. So we can feel the fears. I have an undefined spleen center. And like I noticed around the elections, I get this chaotic vibrational energy in my body because I am amplifying and feeling everybody else's fears in my body. So I find I need to just move my body to clear that energy.
Interesting. So if I were to have you do my chart, and let me go back. So we're talking about human design. Is there a difference between plain old human design and quantum human design?
Yeah, so human design was a system that was received by a guy named Ra Uru Hu in the late 1980s. It was a channeled system, and his design was to shock people into awakening. So it speaks to our conditioning, and it's meant to wake people up. I studied quantum human design with Karen Curry Parker, who was one of his students. He had always said that he received the system, but he didn't know all the ways in which we were going to use it. And he had said that there would always be a writing of the awakened version. But he passed in 2011. And so Karen Curry Parker wrote Quantum Human Design, which speaks more to the potential in the chart. It gives us more of our blueprint for growth. But also the way we look at the chart changes a little bit, because some people will talk about how there's no choice because there's these themes that you're here to explore and there's no choice. In quantum human design, because we're talking about archetypes, there's a lot of choice because there's a whole spectrum of ways that you can express a theme of love or devotion or all of these different themes that it means to be human. And so when we look at quantum human design, we look at how that awareness allows us to have more choice. And we also talk about it in that we all have all the chart. You'll hear people sometimes say, well, I don't have that in my chart because it's not defined in their chart. But our openness is just as much a part of us as our definition. We just experience those energies in a different way.
Interesting. So you were talking about some things being complete and some not complete. I know that's not the right term. Do we come into the world that way, or do we complete things and then move to something else?
Yeah, your natal chart does not change throughout your lifetime. And so there are things that we can learn about ourselves through that natal chart that doesn't change. We grow and evolve in our expression of that chart throughout our lifetime, but the chart itself doesn't change.
So we're born that way. Okay. So how do we then use what we learn about our own human design to help us deal with our life?
So I find the first thing people always say is, I've never felt so seen in my life. And it can be very validating. And what I find is people will say I've always felt that about myself, but I never allowed myself to accept it, or somebody told me that was wrong, or society tells us we shouldn't be that way. And so there's a lot of judgment that can get released. But where I really love to go with the quantum human design is it is that blueprint for growth. So we can get insights into how do we make decisions that are right for us, that keep us aligned with our authentic selves. Then we also can learn recognize the patterns. What are those fears that keep showing up over and over again that kind of keep us stuck and sabotaging? Or what are the patterns in our relationships that may not be serving us? And again, with that awareness, then we can say, oh, okay, that's what's going on energetically. Maybe the energetics aren't personal, but then I can choose how I respond to those energetics to change and break those patterns.
So that our quantum human design is almost like holding the leash, if you will, and walking us. And when we realize that we can control the direction to an extent, it gives us the power to respond as opposed to reacting. That our reactions are what's most natural, not necessarily I don't want to say best, the most efficient, the most productive way for us to behave.
Yeah. And the whole body graph right now is under pressure. We're going through this evolution where we're becoming more aware, our consciousness is shifting, where we're becoming less reactive, less reacting out of fear, reacting out of those things, like you said, that maybe aren't serving us. And we're moving towards a consciousness where how do things feel? And what we create, how we create more equitability, more sustainability, more justice, more peace in the world is from moving to a place where we're more conscious of well-being.
How does something like that happen in society as a whole if we're governed by the astrological signs as well as the conditions or whatever was going on the 3 months before our birth? What changes us to be more receptive to reaction versus responding?
Yeah, so this is an evolutionary shift, and it is astrological in nature. And there's a 400-year cycle that we go through. And so one of those shifts is coming up in 2027. And so it's not like in 2027 a switch flips and all of a sudden we're healed and everything's changed, but we're navigating this evolution. And I think you can kind of feel it out in the world and the way people are talking about things. And we are becoming more aware of our well-being. I think there can be some grasping to hold on to what was. And we see that in the chart as well. The most innovative channel, which is where two gates line up in the chart, it includes the gate 3, which is innovation, and the gate 60, which is conservation. So it's that our path to change and evolution also says, let's build on what's working. Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. And so you can see kind of both of those elements showing up in the world.
I keep hearing the song, The Dawning of the Age of Aquarius, and thinking about that. And for some of our listeners, this may be a little woo. Just the idea that there's something operating very outside of ourselves that we have no control over. Maybe our parents had a little bit of control over when they got pregnant, but probably not a whole lot of it. It's fascinating. So how do we use this to help deal with grief and with loss?
Sure. And I think one point, going back to this being a little bit woo, is with quantum science, the science is finally catching up in some degree. We're not all the way there, but piece by piece, their pieces are coming into place.
Well, definitely. I mean, we can just talk a little bit about the fact that I think it's now a mainstream idea that everything is energy and that energy doesn't disappear. Whereas 10, maybe 20 years ago, everything was black and white. There was no such thing as that. I think the idea of things happening at the same time and the time doesn't exist is still out there a little, because we can't see that.
Right.
And we're much more of a concrete kind of society.
Yeah. And that's part of that evolutionary shift that we're experiencing. We're going from that consciousness around what can we measure from, the scientific Newtonian kind of physics, all the way to our putting value on numbers, what we can measure, the amount in your bank account, the size of your clothes, like all of those things are based in numbers. And we're really just starting to shift into, but how do you feel?
Exactly. And just taking that number 8 and turning it on its side, and it's infinity. So we have to remember that.
Yes. So getting back to your question about how we can leverage our human design as we move through grief. I think for me, it's a tool that we can use to not lose ourselves in that grieving process. And I think there are different stages of that grief process where we maybe have the capacity to connect with it and leverage it more than at other points. Early on, it's probably not a tool we're going to use. But as we start to move through grief and start to reconnect with, like, okay, yes, we have this loss and we're still moving forward. And so I think in that moment, it can help us really make choices that align with our authentic self. It can help us connect to what's really meaningful to us. And it also can show maybe some of those areas where we might be getting pulled off our path, and how can we strategize to stay connected to ourselves as we move forward.
I like that idea of staying rooted, staying connected with our authentic self, even though we've gone through a loss, even though maybe the most important person in your life is no longer physically with you. And that could be death, it could be divorce, it could be, moving even, and just not having that person right next to you all the time. Sometimes we forget that the most important person needs to be ourselves, and it needs to be our authentic self. I like to tell my clients that while we're dealing with loss and grieving, we also need to find the silver linings, and to realize that often being at the depth of despair is the best place for growth. I remember working with a coach who used to talk about, well, maybe you're the seed that's just been planted in that dark, cold earth, and you're just waiting to have it pop open and sprout. And this is your chance right now to decide what kind of flower you're going to be. That for the first time maybe in your life, you don't have to have anybody saying you're going to be a daughter, a wife, a mother, a teacher, or whatever. You can choose what are those things. And so now having the quantum human design opens up so much more, and it helps you to really define who that person can be without limits.
Yes, I love that, because human design, in quantum human design, that it really is the story. And so it connects us to the role that we're here to play in the world. It connects us to our personality and how we live out that role and take up that unique space that we're all here to be in the puzzle of the world. And it also gives us insights into our purpose and our plot line. So when we come to the other side of that and we're kind of maybe floundering, whether it's, for me, it was the loss of a job and how that shook my identity. But whatever that loss is, it gives you that roadmap back to yourself.
Which I love. For me, it was, well, I sold my business. That was after my husband had passed away, after my parents, my mother and stepfather passed away. And then I moved. And then 2 years later, my best friend died. So it was just, I didn't really know who I was. COVID happened and it was like, okay, now what? I don't have the career that I'd had for 25 years. I don't have the circle of friends around me. I don't have my support systems. What do I do? And it's always wonderful to have another tool in your toolbox to help.
Yes,
so
I love that. I am all about filling your toolbox. I always say the 4 things are like that self-awareness piece, that deconditioning, getting free of those fears, doubts, shoulds, all those limiting beliefs, figuring out what it is you want. Not that you have to see the whole picture, but like just following the little nuggets of like, oh, that sounds interesting. I'm going to go get curious about this thing. And then the 4th piece is filling that toolbox, because I heard, I listened to the Line podcast with this woman who's an Akashic Records reader. And one of the things I heard Ashley say is alignment is a practice. And so it's like filling that toolbox so that you can come back to alignment more quickly, more easily. So I think the toolbox is such an important piece.
You said a few other things, but the one that's popping into me right now is take the first step. We don't need to know what's at the end of the road. The people who started on the Camino de Santiago may not have known where they were going. They just knew they took one step and then another step, which is very much what happens with grief. When my husband died, I had no idea what I was doing. All I knew was that I had 2 children who were 11 and 14 and a business, and everything was counting on me. So it was like, get up in the morning, get dressed, brush your teeth, go take care of things. I didn't think, I just did things on road. And then when things started to clear a little and to lift, then I could take the next steps. And, it took years. It's been 24 years since my husband passed. And I'm still growing. I have no idea where I'll end up. And I hope nobody else does either. I hope we all get the thrill and the excitement of being able to grow into things. And
that's one of the things I think quantum human design teaches us is we don't have to figure it out. When we look at the human design, the head center, which is the triangle at the top, it's the center for ideas and inspiration, but it's full of questions, not answers. And so what happens is we tend to turn those questions in on ourselves with judgment, but those questions are really meant to be turned over to the universe, source, God, whatever you call it. And then we follow what is called our strategy and authority in human design. It's how we make decisions that are right for us. And we see what shows up for us. And then we follow the clues to what is that next right step. And so that's one of the great things with quantum human design is it helps you know and how you make those decisions.
Right. Like I happen to rely on my gut.
Yes.
And the few times in my life that I made bad decisions, poor decisions, however we want to call them, were when I didn't listen to my gut and I asked other people and made my decisions that way. And so it's, it was a very expensive, very emotional period of time. And I learned. I listened to the gut. And I've also, for me, I've learned when I'm feeling that it's a bad decision and I should not do something versus when it's a little scary or exciting and yes, I should do it. And that sometimes takes a lot of discerning to know which one you're feeling, because excitement and fear are very similar. So,
Yes. And I think that's where the deconditioning process comes in, where we can start to see what are those patterns that are causing us to not trust our gut or whatever your strategy and authority is. We can see like, oh, is it a pattern where you feel like you have to prove your value? Or is there a pattern of people pleasing? Or is there a pattern of like, what are those fears that come up for you maybe consistently? For me, based on my definition, I have the gate 57 defined, and it's that fear of the unknown. And so that idea of like feel the fear and do it anyway, those fears are based in the spleen center. They're meant to be momentary, subtle pulses to keep you at a certain level of well-being, but they're not meant to stay with you forever.
Yeah. They're meant to protect you from the saber-toothed tiger.
Exactly.
And they retreat. And that's when we're listening to our ego as opposed to our heart or our gut. And so those are.
And our body carries a lot of that wisdom. It's how our bodies feel that clues us into what that right thing is for us. And it's going to be different. Like for an alchemist, for time bender and quantum human design, which are generators and manifesting generators in traditional human design, like you said, we get that gut. But for other types, they get this like splenic pulse that's subtle in the moment. It's those things that we often notice without hindsight. It's a bright sunny day and you get this pulse to grab the umbrella. It doesn't make sense. But you go out and 3 hours later, it's pouring. And you're like, oh, that's what that pulse was about. And so it's those things that we notice with hindsight. But over time, we start to become more aware of what they feel like. And then we can act on them more quickly if that's our strategy.
Is there a way to help somebody to, like, after they've had their human design, to be able to focus more on their body and the signs that their body is giving them?
Yes, that's the part that I love, is really helping people embody their design and take it off the page. And it's practice. It's reflecting so that you start to become aware of those sensations, because and this is where I find my 20 years as a physical therapist comes in. I spent a lot of time helping people pay attention to what was going on beneath here as their body was trying to send them messages. But I think building a practice of connecting in with your body, whether that's meditation, whether that's some kind of movement, there's a lot of different tools that can help that process. But I think that's an important piece of the process.
You mentioned a whole lot of terms of types of categories. I'm trying to think how to of types of people that
we call them types in human design.
Okay. So what are they? What are some of the differences?
Sure. So there are 5 types in quantum human design and traditional human design. I like to use the quantum language just because, like I said, it's more expansive, it's more empowering, but they kind of correlate with the traditional human design types. So the first type we have are initiators. And if you think of a theater production, they're like the producer. They have this internal nonverbal creative flow they have to follow. And then based on their authority, they get the pulse that now's the time to move into action. And they're here to initiate others. So they don't necessarily have that sustainable energy to bring that idea to form themselves, but they get the ball rolling.
So they're they're idea generators and tell other people to do the work.
Yeah, and they really just share what comes through in that creative flow. Their strategy is to inform others and let them know what they're thinking about or what they're following at that point in time.
Okay.
Then we have orchestrators, and they are like the director. They're here to guide us into bringing the ideas into form. But again, they don't have that sustainable workforce, life force energy of the sacral center defined. So they're holding the template for what's possible. They see the roadblocks. They see the actions that need to be taken. But for them, their strategy is to wait for the invitation, but that invitation is really more about recognition. It's about waiting for the people that they're meant to guide to recognize the value that they bring so that they're guiding the people they're meant to. Because if you just go out trying to tell people what to do, it's probably not going to go real well.
I think of a conductor. A conductor can't go out onto the street and expect to have an orchestra in front of them, that they need to be in front of musicians who know how to read the music and know how to play their instrument, and then they can conduct.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. And these first two types, they need a lot of rest. They need time to restore themselves. And that doesn't mean sitting on the couch worrying about, watching Netflix, worrying about whatever else is going on or all the things they should be doing. It's that like staying in those things that really do fuel them. And then we have alchemists, and they are like the cast and crew. They're the builders and the doers of the world. They have that sustainable energy so that they can do the building and the doing when they're in the right work. And how they find that right work is their gut says, this is for me. And so they respond to things outside of themselves. It's not I've got this idea in my head and now I move into action on it. It's like, oh, okay. I'm scrolling through social media and this picture of a tropical place shows up and my gut goes, I need more of that in my life. And then it's like, okay, where is that? And then you go and you book the trip. But it's not the, I should take a vacation. I'm going to sit down at my computer and book something. It's responding to things outside of yourself. Maybe it's the doctor that says, gosh, your high blood pressure is pretty high. What are you doing to de-stress? And so it's these little clues that show up in our lives that move us into action.
Okay.
Then we have time benders, and they're a hybrid of that alchemist. So they have that sustainable energy to be the builders and the doers of the cast and crew in the right work. But they also have that nonverbal creative flow of the initiator. And the purpose of this is to figure out what steps we skip along the way. How do we bend time to bring these ideas into form more quickly? Now, I am a time bender. I know you mentioned you're a time bender. And we're here to, we'll have 10 different plates spinning. We're multi-passionate. And we're not meant to complete everything that we start. And so, yes. And that's the thing. Like the worst thing someone can say to a time bender is, why can't you just pick one thing and stick to it? We're not meant to. But again, we follow our gut. And then we inform. So our gut says, this is for me. And then it's important that we tell the people that are going to be impacted by our actions what's going on. And then the last piece, the last 1% are called calibrators, and they are like the audience. They're sampling the energy of everyone around them. They have only defined gates, so they don't have any of the shapes or the centers defined or colored in their chart. So they're constantly sampling the energy of the world around them, and they're reflecting back to us how well we're doing or not. And so these are the people that are at the center of the conversation around what's in our collective consciousness. I have a business bestie who's a calibrator. She was a mindful leadership coach. And in 2020, her business shifted into the DEI space because that's what we were thinking about collectively at the time. And so she was facilitating those conversations.
Interesting. I'm thinking about the rise in diagnosing, because I don't think it's really a rise in where we are as a population. I may be wrong, of people being diagnosed with ADD, ADHD, which sounds very much like a time bender with multi passions, things going on, not necessarily being able to finish anything. I'm wondering, like, do many people with ADHD, ADD fall into the time bender category?
I think there are some correlations that we can see in the chart, but not everything boils down to the chart. And it's not just the time bender. There are other elements because these themes we often see repeated throughout different layers of the chart. And so there may be elements or patterns energetically that may make you go, I wonder if this contributes to what's going on over here. But I can't say that it's causal. There may be more correlative.
Interesting. So if somebody says, okay, I want to learn more, I want my chart done, I want to work with you, how can they do that?
Yeah, thank you. So on my website, which is kristentoscano.com, if you go to the Start Here tab, if you scroll down, there will be a space where you can enter in your birth date, time, and location. That will give you your quantum human design chart and a little bit of the basic information to get you started. But if you want to go deeper, I'm always up for a conversation to see what makes the most sense for you. I have some people who do a reading because they just are ready to dip their toes in the water and really understand on even a deeper level what that means for them. My favorite way to work is through those more longer term engagements. I do group coaching where we get into the layers of the chart and then we go out and play in our day-to-day lives and see through that experimentation, how do these things show up and work for us? And then how can we maybe do things differently if something's not working for us? And I pull in EFT tapping as well because the meanings that we hold are so important. That's a big part of that language piece. And I also use the EFT to get right to what's the root of that pattern so that we can shift those meanings and create from that higher vibrational state.
I have Nancy Linneruth, who is an EFT practitioner, on the podcast. I'm not sure if we've already had her or we're going to have her, but to help people understand what EFT and tapping is. It's another fabulous tool to put in that tool. It's no longer a tool belt. It's a toolbox. It's a big one.
It really is. And I always tell people, follow the tools that feel good to you. Like, not every tool is going to work for everyone or be the most effective tool, but it's following, again, going back to that strategy and authority, what tools feel good.
I just want to add that getting your chart is wonderful. It's also really complicated. And I would suggest that anybody who's really interested, follow up and go for the session, and then maybe even for coaching, because it's mind-blowing. I remember having somebody explain mine to me, and it's been probably about a year, and a lot of it just went like phew, right over my head. And now I want to go back and, that I've read a little bit more and I've talked more, I want to go back and hear more and see what else I can do.
Yes. And that's a very common path I find for people. Like, you do the reading initially to just kind of get the information, but it can be overwhelming. And I really like to figure out, like, what's the practical application of it? Like, I don't want it to be just another thing and go, oh, that's cool, and then go back to doing things the way you've always done them. But I find that there is that integration period where you get that information. It takes some time for it to really sink in, and you kind of have to marinate in it. And then you get the pulse that, like, okay, now the time is right for me to go deeper and really leverage the insights of my human design.
And I think we probably all did that the first time we heard anything about astrology. So it's, it takes time. We only can learn what we can integrate and what we understand. And that changes on a day-to-day basis. Years ago, I was a sex educator, and I used to tell the story of the 5-year-old who would ask his mother, you know, how did I get born? Why am I here? And the mother would go through the whole thing about the birds and the bees and how people had sex. And he's like, Johnny was born in this hospital. Was I born there too? That's all he understood, and that's all he wanted to know. So, the questions and the answers change as we age and as our experiences change. And that's the same with quantum human design, all of that. So,
Yes.
Kristen, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to following up with you personally and hope that our listeners will do the same. And please, if anybody has questions, feel free to email me and I will pass them along to Kristen, or go to Kristen's website, kristentoscano.com, and follow up on your own.
Yes, and that reminds me, if you don't know exactly what time you were born, reach out to me through my website, or I'm at Kristen Toscano on Instagram, and I can help you navigate that as well.
That's great. It's always something I always think about. Is like, well, what if they wrote the wrong time down on the birth certificate? Is it really right? And I know, for example, people who are not necessarily born in the US, what gets written down and when could be completely different. My children were born in Mexico, and in Mexico, most births don't happen in hospitals. They're not recorded until, or at least this was 30 something years ago, until the child is ready to start school. And then they go in and get the paperwork for a birth certificate. So by that point, you're talking 5-6 years later, nobody remembers. They might remember the day.
Mm-hmm.
So it's good to know.
Yeah, and what I find is some days things change a lot throughout the day. Some days the high level stuff that we get into doesn't change a lot. So you can get enough to kind of get going. And really, if we can narrow down your strategy and your authority, which is that decision-making process, if you do nothing else but follow that, that will really make a big difference for you. And we can usually use the design itself to help us get to your truth around the time.
Great. This is so exciting. Thank you so much, Kristen. And for our viewers, catch us in 2 weeks. Okay. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Amy.
If you liked what you heard on this podcast and want to hear more, please follow us and tell your friends. You can also find me on Facebook at Amy Lindner Lesser, Grief to Growth Life Coaching, and on LinkedIn at Amy Lindner Lesser.